Hello. Yes, I just want to continue with my conversation or a letter talking to everybody out there. Speaking on various subjects. I've already tried to do intros, which are and some introductions, which are going to be put into writing as well. Hopefully this is going to be put into writing, but I'm doing it on the microphone, making audio recording of these things. Please bear with me for the pauses, and hopefully it will be put into a proper writing format eventually. I just wanted to talk on various subjects related to topics in my book, The Masks of Zion. As I say, this book, an audio recording, is going out to humanity, out to truthers, people who are interested in truth, who want to seek the truth, know the truth, whatever that may be. We're all here on the journey, we're living on this planet, and we're all, whether we know or not, maybe we're subconsciously looking, searching for pieces of the puzzle to make sense of our lives, to make sense of reality, our perception of reality, and the systems that are around us, and whether they are for us or against us. Even the systems that we think that may be for us, may be subtly against us. And these are my opinions of a laity person. It means a person, a member of the community, the people. My email address is laityteachers.com or .co.uk or hotmail.co.uk. The idea of the laity teachers, which in fact, part of my idea for this book is to put information that I've discovered over the years, different subjects, which affect us all, and particularly the Christian community. So this book is partly going out to the Christian community, people who claim to maybe know Christ. And I'm wanting to strip back and go back to the roots, what truth is, and what, because in the day there's only one opinion matters from a point of view of if you're a Christian or a person who claims to follow Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, the Meshiach in Hebrew. And if you're a truther, then maybe some of the things that I'm saying may help you in your own path of discovery of truth. I'm not trying to preach. I know personally that God is real and that He sent His Son, and the experience of knowing freedom from our own wrongs, and knowing peace, forgiveness deep within, a new start, and a spiritual power which is part of the new birth experience. I know that is real. I can only describe that, and people have to choose to or want to experience that themselves, which is the whole idea of faith. And God wants us to step into the one room to the other room, even though the lights aren't on until we step into the other room. And that's like stepping into the place of opening the door. As Jesus says in Revelation 3:20, though I stand at the door and knock, if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him, with her, and they with me. So it's about fellowship, it's about intimacy, friendship, communication, community. And I know that the systems of the world have manipulated us as people, tried to put us into boxes and labels with religions and tags and names, and ultimately we're all should be trying to live together and grow together without we need to, without differences, we have differences, but it's about knowledge, with understanding, with patience. We've got to rise above the things from the past, and also some of the tricks that are played on us from around and about, from above, and from, when I say above, I mean, up there, with the authorities, like the pyramid structure. So part of the things I'm dealing with is the idea of the pyramid and the Egyptian slave master, the king, the pharaoh, and the ideas of the ancient world are partly the understanding of where we've come from, because historically and archaeologically we can prove these facts. We can look at the English language, we can go and trace it back to Latin, and then before then we can trace it back to the Phoenicians. We can trace back the idea of civilizations, and like the Egyptians being ahead of everybody else by over 1,000 years, perhaps, when everybody else was still farming or starting to get into farming. They were already building their stone structures with precision, without the technologies of today. So briefly, our civilizations, layer upon layer, from the Egyptians through to the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, up to today's modern era. All the revolutions of industry, education, science, enlightenment, the revolutions that happened, all these things are interwoven. That's part of our history. Everybody knows that, I'm sure. Today or knows something of history. And so part of my introduction, another layer of introduction, is to bear witness to the facts. Truth and facts should go hand in hand. They shouldn't be contradictory, but there are the confusions, there are the misrepresentations, there are the wars of information, there are the manipulations of the structures and the powers that be, and the, some might call the establishment, the elite, the power struggles of the rich versus the poor, versus the class systems, all those things, the idea of communism, fascism, Nazism, political understandings, which many of us already have, or may have known little about or a lot about. And as I've grown up over the times, of the years, I've grown to see that a lot of in my opinion, the politicians, the politics, are inventions of control, and that they serve the higher or elite of the rich and the bankers and the royals, and that overlaps into the church systems. Who claim to know Christ, yet don't make an effort to reach out and to be friend, and though many do. But when was the last time you really saw a working class thriving church? It's mostly all middle class, well-to-do people who were Caucasian, and we want to understand why is this so? Why are the churches very inward? I'm not trying to be critical, but I'm saying, for their own sake, as they claim to be the bride or the church, the body of Christ, Jesus people, then we all have got to look in the mirror and see what's going on. And in order to discover truth and to create change, sometimes the negative has to be faced. We have to look in the mirror and look at the face, look at the warts on the face, as well as the nice hair or lack of hair, or whatever. So unfortunately, part of my message is going to probably upset a few people, and maybe Christians generally as a whole. Or I'm praying that the discerning among them are the true seekers, and the people who generally walk or try to know God. And this could include anybody who's a truth seeker, who may not be looking for God, but is just looking for truth. that some of the things I say may answer questions, and that maybe that people might say, oh, it's meant to be that I heard that CD, read that book, saw that website, and so all I want to do is to pass on some of the knowledge and thoughts, understandings, experiences. Many of them are they're all basically biblically backed, and this is backed up as well with facts and general other things, other documented reports in the past to now to back up all these things. So I want to discuss various subjects. So like for example, start off with this was an introduction to things to do with church. But one of the things I don't do, well, actually, I don't go to church anymore. And one of the reasons is I'm protesting about it, because I have been part of churches, and some of them have been very good, and they've helped me, and they've been family orientated, and they've really brought me, created a foundation of understanding about and experiencing God, and it was good. But as I've gone on, I wanted to learn, and as I've discovered that there are certain truths that are not employed or not talked about by the leadership, speakers, priests, and whoever, clergies and pastors, and but actually when you go and research things for yourself and learn things for yourself, read the Bible for yourself, talk to God for yourself, discover, and then you wonder why are certain things the way they are, and you look at the history books and you see that the church was built on top of a Roman foundation, and Jesus, Yeshua, was a Hebrew, he was a Jew from the tribe of Judah, where we get the term Jew from, comes from Judah, which was the royal house of David. He was offspring from Nathan, not Solomon. And basically the ideas of the roots and understandings of the church, and why it became like it did, that it did become an imperialistic power that was as bad as in the way it treated other peoples and conquered the world, conquered Europe, which people might argue that was a foundational part of so-called civilization in the West, that it had to happen in order for us, which maybe it did, to grow or to know. And one thing about Europe and Britain, we've been there, we've seen it, we've had it happen. And other countries are yet still find it difficult to walk through into being able to let go from its religions and into new thought, being able to think out in the box and discover consciousness, discover conscience, discover freedom to be yourself without having to be in subjection to authorities which might claim to be from the Creator. But clearly, as part of my research is to prove that there are hidden facts. Some Christians may think, it doesn't matter, but I think these things do matter, because, as I say, looking into the mirror, as I now talk to the average Christian who goes to church on a Sunday, who may or may not have a faith, they might just be churchgoers, religious people, but they might not have really experienced God for themselves. The bride of Christ, the body of Christ, the church, blah, 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 what you like to call it, the body of Christ is supposed to be a bride. If you understand what the basic message of the Bible is from start to finish, it's God the Creator and His creation, and Him wanting to, not to be a tyrant, but to get to know us, to be a family. That's what I think if you believe in creation, that He wanted something that was called, like Him, looked like Him, which he could have his own nation, a people, a family, who he could call his own, that he could actually as well bless all the rest of the nations. And that was the idea of the children of Israel. That was the whole point, from Abraham through to Jacob, through to the child of Israel, and the nation of the original Israel, Hebrew Israel, that were Arabic, and maybe even Afro-Caribbean in appearance. That they were, they were meant to be the vessels. They thought, well, to be separate, so he could just show the rest of the nations that were involved in all sorts of things, worshipping all sorts of gods and horrible deities, and involved with horrible sacrifices and human sacrifice and all these other things, child sacrifice and all these horrible things, and worshipping the creation, not the creator, which has always been the great battle, spiritual battle between the created world and the forces wanting to be worshipped. Some may call those the gods. From the Bible's perspective, those gods are the fallen angels and their offspring, who some may believe still have their thrones and ruling now around us in as we see so we'll talk about that later. A lot of this is on the internet, so I'm wanting to string a lot of all these collections together, which the Truth Movement made, and talks about these things, knows these things. David Icke talks about these things, and I've got a lot of respect for David Icke, because, well, he was one of the main guys to go and deep into the rabbit hole, or discover the rabbit hole, and bring out some of these factors, and dealing with the understanding of secret societies, the hidden symbols that are around us, that we have in plain sight, that mean something to the people who run this world. The authorities, their families have always run the world. And as his book actually one of his books, The Biggest Secret, I haven't read any of the others, but the one that I think is quite a good foundational book, even for Christians, even believe it or not, is the truth of the facts of how the nations became who they are, how Britain became, and the British Empire and the royalties, and how they related to going right back to the Egyptian dynasties, pharaohs. And this is true. So if you look at, so all I'm trying to do is I'm doing a broad spectrum of inquiry subjects in this book audio series, and wanted to uncover and go down into the rabbit hole, but not just from David Icke's understandings, as I'm probably going to be using some of his material, but I've done my own research, not just reading one of his books or reading parts of one of his books. I've gone and done my own research, and interestingly enough, other Christian sources, I discovered one confirming what David Icke was saying, which he probably doesn't even know. And so dealing with, we're talking about secret societies, we're talking about how that the idea of the pyramid structure, that the earth isn't round, it's a pyramid structure. So it could be a spiritual pyramid, and like Pink Floyd's song, Brick in the Wall, that we're only just a brick in the wall. So society has been created, and we're being to keep us in a certain state, and to remain a certain state, where people, even though we're told that we can access education or whatever, and we can, I do believe in self-improvement, and there are all those possible positive outlets out there for people to self-improve, but as I say, generally the status quo is maintained. So some of the things first I want to talk about relating to the church structure, or the idea of the church. Church meaning community. The original idea of community or church is the original. Jesus, Yeshua had his family, his people around him, his followers, disciples, and that early community of his people, his body, grew up through circumstances and situations which many may not believe happened, but I believe it did physically happen. And also all the early first leaders and pastors and bishops and whatever you like to call it. And I think there was a transitional stage where a lot of those bishops probably were true and did follow God and were true to the original plan, or the original template that I think God or Jesus wanted to continue. But as I say, he warned this, and the disciples warned about this in the scripture, that template was going to be taken and changed into another format, or covered over with layers of something else, and then built up into a new structure, which actually, when you actually delve deep, has nothing to do with the original structure. Like, for example, the whole idea of church, people think of maybe it's a building, but the whole idea of it is it's supposed to be community. And God says about, he did have a tent of dwelling. He wanted to dwell with the people that he created, and he did that through Abraham and his seed. And there was the tent of meeting, which was just and the Levites were the chosen priesthood to attend before the tribes of Israel when they met during the feast days, etc. And then God was going to be wanting to be in the midst, and he was going to bless them, and they were going to give of thanks and offerings of thanks and gratitude to him, which makes sense. It's a partnership. The word covenant is a covenant. So God is a covenant keeping God. He wants us to be true because we're in a partnership. That's the idea of family, of fatherhood. The father and like looking out for us. Like Jesus says about not worrying about our life, what we'll eat, what we'll drink, what we'll wear. For our Father knows what we need before we ask. But the idea that the idea of having a people for himself is also spoken of in the Old Testament as a husband and a wife relationship, and we see that mirrored in Isaiah and in Haggai, Habakkuk, some of the other prophets and other themes. So basically, it's a theme of God and his people, how his people. They, as soon as they came out of Egypt after he delivered them, they were immediately wanting to. They took some of those ideas, they had ideas that they got from living in Egypt, and they wanted immediately to worship something that wasn't, that was just a calf or something, a cow, a bull. And they were so eager to do that and strip off and get involved with all sorts of things that, that couldn't. Well, you wouldn't be able to act like that today. Although some people might might have done it or do things of such sort and worse. That's another subject. But we see the idea of a relationship, God and a man and a wife, and then that's reflected in the New Testament, where Christ, God is working through the Son, and we are meant to be one. So we're a household, a family, because Jesus says, "When you come to me, and here we are coming and dwelling in the place." So we are the new Israel. We're part of the old Israel, but really the old Israel and the new Israel is one, not through tribes, or whether you're Arab, whether you're black, whether you're Hebrew, or whether you're whether you were in the tribes of Israel or not physically, who they were. But underneath all that is the idea, which I think God was trying to get over, and the outward sign was circumcision, was the idea of our hearts being set aside to Him, having faithfulness. It says that faithfulness be forever inscribed in your heart. Love and faithfulness, they go together. So any foundation of any relationship is faith, love, trust, honour. And that's the whole idea of marriage from a church point of view, is that you'll make a decision, whether you're a Christian or not, but you make a decision to do the marriage thing, to declare to the world, I'm going to be faithful to one person. And the whole idea of the rings is an outward sign to the world. It's an action. It's like a prophetic action of the prophets. It's like a speaking out of commitment. So you've got these reflections, these layers of truth from the Old Testament, New Testament, even into the traditions of our way of life, or as they were, of traditions, layers of foundations, and then that extends to family life, to society. So the whole idea of the Ten Commandments is based basically on respect, and the golden rule, as Jesus said about love one another. It's better to, you do what you want to be treated like, treat others as they want to be treated. And I think that's the general golden rule. People learn that or practice that, we'd have a better world. Our desires, our carnal desires, push us in the wrong direction. And without knowledge, without self-restraint, without understanding, as God says in the scriptures, in the Old Testament, to seek understanding, seek knowledge. If you want to founder a business or any venture, it says we need knowledge, you need understanding, and in the multitude of counsellors, and that's of advisors, something can be maintained, it can be established. So our lives, and our reflections of society are reflected back onto the Judeo-Christian values that we may or may not adhere to. I think a lot of the misconceptions, or the way people may choose to rebel, because we don't truly understand the Bible or what God wants. That He's not a tyrant. And I actually say I don't go to church because I felt God has brought me out of church to work out and try to build truth and discover truth that has been hidden from within the church. And why is it that we don't do certain things like the early community of Christ, of Yeshua, Hebrews and Gentiles together through faith, like the faith of Abraham? What they did, they kept the Sabbath, the true Sabbath, which is the Saturday, and they did lots of other things that the other original disciples had, because they saw that they were one, and it was a people. But as I say, after the first century and through persecutions, Christians, and also the growth of the faith, it did lead to the clash of groups of people who were still wanting to hold on to the gods and the ancient superstitions and ways, for example, of Mithras, of Saturnalia, worship of Saturn, the worship of other related gods from Egypt and the Phoenicians and all these things that were mixed up or were part of the normal ancient world. But when Christ came, that message did go out and it did change. It shook the Roman Empire to such an extent that it nearly split apart. And then Constantine, between 300 AD and 312, whatever, when they had the Council of Nicaea, the original council that began, which was an ecumenical council. It was either a compromise of bringing two groups together, or whatever, or it brought all the bishops from all over the area together, and some of them were actually used to fight, physically fight. But Constantine, being the emperor, he did have some kind of experience. I don't know, but he was a murderer, and he did murder his mother, and he was a murderer, and he did have a cult himself, of which he enforced the penalty of death, called Sol Victus, which is the idea of the sun worship, and the sun was always seen as the king of the gods through the ancient world, and the pantheistic, which means pantheistic means multitude of gods, not monotheistic, which means one god, and the idea of the sun worship, Sol. We have the Sol system, solar system, Sol, the solstice. Sol is the sun. Sol was also one of the gods related to Apollo. It might have been his brother, or there were sometimes the Greek Roman pantheon, the names overlapped to mean the same, or there were like variations of the same. So there are so many gods, or main pantheon of gods, with the god king, Jupiter, Zeus, and other names like Apollo, who had their other other version of the same, was in another empire, another ancient religion. Then there was the female deities that were related to the moon. So to me, I think the ancient ideas of worship go back to the original ideas of man, related to the sun, worshipping the sun, and the sun being mixed up with emperor worship, and because they did have that cult of the hero, and the god cult, the god man king cult, queen cult, which is part of the dynasties, part of the makeup of those empires from Egypt, Babylon. They all had a similar thing of royalty, and people bowed down to the theocratical kingdoms, and they had to lift up Pharaoh, and they had to, work, and there were slaves. Many of the people were slaves, and they worked for the whole purpose of lifting up one of these kings, one of these pharaohs who saw himself like the sun god. So the idea of the Tower of Babel, reaching up to the heavens to touch God, or to touch something that is similar to God, is the idea of man reaching up, which is what religion is as a whole. It's about man trying to reach God. But the idea of the gospel, built on top of the prophets, is that God is reaching out to man. And he's not the sun god, he's not the solar system of gods that have been, even in our science world today, many of the men of science and space attribute a lot of their hardware and the names of the planets have been called after these deities, which is a kind of a subtle continuation of the names of the gods from the ancient world. The Greeks, it was the Greek philosophers who helped change the minds of men to stop looking up at the heavens and attributing them to personalities, and to bring them down to earth, to the beginnings of man being in control of his own destiny. Man being that's where we get the term. We have the term democracy, which was built through the Greeks and continued in the Romans, although they did have their gods, and they did have their cruel ways, and their emperor, it was an empire, they did have their empirical ways. But the idea of a lot of the philosophers helped man see that he was his own person, and philosophers had thinking about geometry and maths and the early even equations of Pythagoras, Fibonacci, and some of the foundations of science began then, which a lot of some of the mystical computations, astronomical computations of the universe, mapping the universe, are ancient as well, and mathematical. Some people may know about the Mayans and their sun chronology temples, and how that also relates to the universe and the Milky Way, and that is also reflected with the Babylonians, and they had similar. It was all basically related as well to the worship of the sun, the deities of the sun, Kronos, which was time, which was a cousin or a brother of the sun, who was Saturn. He was so Saturn is Kronos, time, and then we have the ideas of time and infinity and the circle. So I'm now just going into a bit deep now, but the general ideas that you would, some people might call it occult, but just means, cult sometimes means just hidden information, but some of them are foundational ideas, like the circle and the square. The circle means time, infinity, eternity, and the square can mean the foundation of what we can see tangibly, or it can mean the fourth dimension. It can mean the cube, which is this reality beyond the three dimension, into the reality of what is. That, in a sense, we're in prison in this reality till we die. And interestingly enough, the cross is also a sun symbol, but it's also, if you think about it, the cross from a Christian point of view, the long bottom and the short end, top, is actually a cube undone. So anyway, part of my wanting to talk here is to see that a lot of the foundations of Christianity were unknowingly, they haven't been promoted and shouted about, and this is reflected in the pagan holidays like Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day, other things, Chose Tuesday, Ash Wednesday, and all these other things. There are other dates. The worship of saints, all kind of go back to the Roman foundation, which was a mix where it was a compromise. The whole idea of ecumenicalism is compromise, and before you know it, you compromise too much, and there's nothing of the truth left. There's nothing radical, nothing life-changing, nothing inspiring left. You're going back to the dead religion of, dare I say it, God forbid, pagan worship and sacrifice to the gods and to the sun god and to Baal, who was a horrible bull-looking creature who was also strangely the sun god. And so which is when we're going back to all that, and it does say in the Word of God, in God's last book, the Revelation, or the Apocalypse, or the revealing of the last days, the last things, the eschatology, which means the study of the last times, which is what I'm dealing with. What I'm talking about now is the idea, the knowledge that it says about Mystery Babylon, it says, and the revival of Mystery Babylon. The Babylon has always been there. The mystery is it's a mystery to us because we don't have the knowledge, and it's been kept hidden. It was a mystery even to the prophets when Daniel saw visions of the end of the world. You know, he felt very ill, and he didn't eat, and he didn't, and John had similar experiences. And many of the prophets who saw and heard, they were very upset, even depressed. They got bad depression, and I know what that's like. But the sun god and the ideas of the gods, it was the idea of paganism, which through Constantine as like the chief, he was the emperor, and he was like the chairman of the committee of the Council of Nicaea. He was the guy who basically, they probably said, you've got to agree or else, and they formed a new religion called Christianity, which actually was a mixture of pagan ideas and biblical ideas, with the agreement of the bishops. Some of them who may have been true to God, some of them might have been a bit here and a bit there, and some of them may have been actually hidden mystical men or mystery school men, or people who practiced the mysteries and actually were pantheistic. They were pagan before, and they maybe they were underneath and they were just pretending, because the ideas and theologies, again, they were all writing from scratch there. In a sense, they were trying to create a foundation which contributed to the canon, where we have the 66 books, where some biblical books which the Christian community in the ancient world had and enjoyed, and didn't have a problem with. And yes, there were different types of groups. There were some people that were regarding as Gnostic, which some people would say means knowledge, that they were trying to get saved through knowledge. But I think there was a great controversy, and we're told, even I was told that in church when I first went, and I was confirmed and then was baptised. Well, no, I was confirmed, for confirmation to take communion in the Church of England after I'd become a Christian in 1985. We had sessions with the curate, teaching sessions, and he did mention about the Gnostics. So they're clearly against the Gnostics. But what we're not told is that there were two Gnostic ideas and traditions that thrived, which actually became part of what was Christianity. One was syncretism, and the other one was Nicolaitism. And syncretism is the idea of marrying two together into one thing, creating a hybrid. And the fallen angels, which we talk about in the book of Enoch, and it's in Jude and in Genesis, and it's one of the reasons why God caused the deluge, which destroyed the first world, was because of the fallen angels taught different things and wickedness and different crafts to people, and it created, and they also intermarried with the women, and created a terrible planet full of violence and evil. But that was the idea of hybridization of, and you see this reflected in the science fiction movies, the idea of taking the DNA and changing it and making new forms and mixing one animal with another. And we're starting to see that now, that people have been doing it, and have done that with cloning the sheep, dye the sheep. And it says that Jesus says that as the days of Noah, so it would be again. We would see, even though some of it is a bit hidden away, it's not publicised on the news, but it is on the internet. But sometimes you hear things come out. Is the mixing around with the fundamental building blocks of life, where nothing is sacred. So the DNA chain has been mapped, and the Higgs boson particle has been discovered or named, which is okay, but we've got to be careful where all these things go, because even 50, 60 years ago with the Second World War, the people who sponsored the Nazis and a lot of Hitler's formation of his philosophical, metaphysical, his intellectual ideas came from reading books written by people who lived in the West, who lived in America, who lived in Britain. And a lot of the ethos that was around before the Second World War came from Britain, came from America. And the royals, as people may not know or may know, had an interest in eugenics, which is relating to what David Icke says about the royals. They have like a god. The royals have a god mentality, a little god mentality, or whatever. That they are the gods and we are the minions. We're the plebs, according to Prince Philip. We're the plebs. We're the peons. We're sometimes seen like cattle. We're the consumers, and maybe many of us are a bit like that, cattle and brain dead and zombie like. But it's time for us all to wake up and get ourselves mature, and it's time for this evolution. If we are evolutionists, believe evolve, it's about time we did. And we need to unplug from the contributions, the pipelines into our mind, into our psyche. For example, the media and the mass media and TV that keep us at a certain level, a low plane of existence. But we feed on what we feed on through choice because of our own couch mentality, perhaps, and our addictions, and we're bombarded things that are always tantalising and changing, playing around with our physical body, our mind, our emotions. We know, I'm sure, I don't have to go into all that to know, in various forms, which we all succumb to at points. We are weak in our flesh. We're weak in our old nature. And Paul talks about that, and Jesus says about that, he's trying to give us a new nature. He wants us to rise up to be who we are. Even Martin Luther King talks about rising up. He says Jesus came to give you up, to raise you up, to take you up. Not, so the devil tries to say that, or did try to say, that you can be like gods if you listen to me. But really God wanted to raise us up to be his children, up into the heavens. But not through listening to his version, not through listening to his perverted light, Lucifer's perverted light. So anyway, so these are some of the things I wanted to mention. We need to understand our own decadent impulses or things that our society has been built around that by those rulers, by those peoples whose families have ruled throughout history, by the bankers. I'm sure I don't have to go into all that about the bankers. Look at all the terrible injustices we've had in the name of so-called democratic. We've trusted, we've voted with these democratic institutions who have then also backed war and bombing other countries, and then letting off people who have clearly created such instability financially and disasters, and they're the ones who are being allowed to pick up their bonuses. And thankfully some countries have actually arrested a lot of their bankers and chucked them out. Like the Rothschilds were thrown out of Russia. Rothschilds were thrown out of other parts of the world, other nations, and in Iceland they arrested a lot of their bankers. But we're still very much at the hub of all that. London, the city of London, all the financial systems, and the whole idea of capitalism. It's nothing to do with really having money. It's all about debt, and they blow up one bubble, and they just do the same things, and they're doing it again, and the masses are still not aware enough. We're not understanding enough about what the systems, behind the scenes, how the systems work, what actually they are. The Federal Reserve. I know I'm digressing now, but I'm going to hopefully talk about these things and share some information on each element. But getting back to the church, the foundational elements there about the Christianity is in fact, dare I say, not the Church of Christ in the original sense of the word. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but it's a hybrid. It's a mixture. And in fact, those traditions, they call it traditions, do fight against the kingdom. They fight against what God wants. They fight against the Bible. They fight against, and you might think this is all a very extreme viewpoint, but I'm just talking to Christians who may be at different levels, but this also relates to everybody else because of their understanding of all these things. And I'm talking from an inside point of view, So the whole idea of manipulation, control, it's being manifested through all the elements, the faces, the forms of establishment, and the church is part of the establishment. Christians may think that they're separate just because they go to one particular fellowship, but they need to at least be aware of these things and to make a stand for these things if they claim to know the truth and they claim to be followers of the Yeshua. And they can't sweep it under the carpet, or they can't, say that it doesn't matter. So if they themselves are believing in the return of Christ and to be gathered to Him, then all these issues must be faced. They've got to look into the mirror. We've all got to look in that mirror. And because I believe that God will allow the church to face such destructive forces from various ways, which is because of the intermarriage with all these ideas, with all these systems and traditions, because He has allowed people to think in a certain way, be in a certain way. But the time is ticking because we're saying if we believe in the Bible, some of us do. As I say, I'm talking to that group of people, that we may or may not believe that. But this book is partly a book about the biblical end of days, and the mass of Zion is about the fact that we are kept. We have masks of, well, not we have masks, but the society's leaderships and establishment wear masks, and they have pasts, and their pasts are kept hidden, and we're constantly confronted with masks, proxies, as they say, and that's what they use to do a lot of their dirty business, and then blame it on somebody else. So the idea of, I'm not saying the church is this, but it's related because it doesn't stand up enough, it doesn't wake up enough, because it's too it's too worried about its own struggles like priesthoods, women priests, and homosexuality. But, it's no good dressing a wound by just putting sticking plaster on. You've got to lance the whole wound, and you've got to get right down to the foundation. And unfortunately, they're not going to do this because the structures, they're part of the structures that have ruled, want to rule, and they're not going to change. So that's part of my introduction to the next section. It's an introduction to the church and the foundation church. So I said, Christianity isn't the original community or biblical-based community, in my view, and I hope to be proving it in the next few sections on here, and then all this hopefully will be put into written format. So I've just basically glossed over and just mentioned some of these things. So we have syncretism was actually a Gnostic teaching. So we're told they don't like the Gnostics, but I was told that they didn't like the Gnostics. It was knowledge, gnosis, which means knowledge, and there were Gnostic groups teaching different versions, or some quite close to the Bible, others right off extreme into different weird things. But there's all this going on, so they defeated and wanted to get rid of all that through the establishment of Christianity and the biblical canon. They just had the 66 books, and the rest of the books were banned, forbidden. You wouldn't, probably go to prison and torture just for having copies of the other books in the canon. So that was a great start. So that was what I call the Roman Empire phase 2. an imperialistic force that went on for right up to now, in the name of God, and crusades. Look at all that. How can that be of the Messiah, of the Father? How can it be of the descendant of Abraham? How can that be of the carpenter of Nazareth, who was a humble man? So the church needs to, the people of God, whether they like to call themselves in a different formats, if they are true within their heart and God looks at their hearts. And I'm not judging anybody from the different traditions, from Catholic to Baptist to Seventh-day Adventist to whoever it is. We all need to, and anybody else out there, we all know that God looks at our heart. He's not judging us, but he wants us to change. And we've got to get back to the roots. We've got to get back to truth. We've got to get back to something that's square, not crooked. A foundation. We can't build a house on sand. We've got to build it on the rock, or a solid place, on Christ. The apostles and the prophets. The church isn't built on the apostles and prophets. It says that it is through the Nicene Creed, but clearly it's not, because it's built on Rome. And Rome was built on 7 hills, and it was built on the worship of the sun god and the moon goddess and all these other pagan ideas and things that clearly were evil. Many of them things were evil. There might have been a grey area where some of these things are sort of understandable and they are eclectic, and some people would say New Age and kind of understandable, to do with energies and perceptions and feeling truth and having your own spirituality, and I understand that and I relate to that. But the other things that that passage themselves into these areas, talking to spirits and all these things, spiritualism and other things, is clearly a no-no as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, so we could talk about the angelic hosts and the battles and the Book of Enoch, and the overlaps between the Book of Enoch, how the Book of Enoch was part of the widely read truths or elements of prophetic things that have a lot of parallel to the gospel, to the Gospels and the Book of Daniel, and at the time. So I just wanted to basically introduce those few things. I hope I've said enough things to back up what I say. So there we go. So coming up to a break time. Thank you.